This weekend, the long-awaited film adaptation of Wicked opened in theaters. So now it's time to rank Wizard of Oz movies from worst to best. Now, looking at IMDb, there are literally hundreds of versions of Wizard of Oz, ranging from smaller TV movies to anime to Veggie Tales to the Muppets to Tom and Jerry. So to keep this simple, I'm only ranking the five theatrically released versions. But if there's a version of Oz that I didn't include that you really enjoy, let me know in the comments. Now, before I begin, I should just say that I've been a pretty big Oz fan for about 15 years now. Ironically, my first exposure to the world of Oz was not the original film, it was actually the Muppets version. When it came out, I was obsessed with Kermit. I was absolutely excited for the Muppets version, and I didn't necessarily get all the parody jokes or references because I hadn't seen the original, but I finally did a few years later. And my first exposure to Wicked was actually in a talent show when I was in first grade, when one of the kids in an older grade did a performance of the song Popular, and again, I didn't really listen to the entire musical or make the connection that it was related to Wizard of Oz until about 10 years later, when my sister really got into Broadway and was constantly playing the soundtrack for Wicked. And that same sister was actually in an elementary school production of The Wiz, where she played one of the citizens of the Emerald City. And when the movie Oz the Great and Powerful came out, I dressed up as Oz and she went as the Wicked Witch when we went to go see it because I knew she was way into Wicked and I wanted her to see an Oz movie. All that said, just to let you know my basis for these movies, now let's get started. And last place is The Wiz. Now, I actually really like the songs in this movie, and I dare say I like these songs better than the songs in the original Wizard of Oz movie. And I think the musical numbers are well choreographed, but that's really the only thing about it that I like. The original Wizard of Oz still holds up even 85 years later and doesn't feel tied to any specific time period. This one does. It's incredibly dated, feeling very late 70s, and it just feels like watching a Broadway show instead of a movie, and it all looks very cheap. Dorothy is an adult in this movie, so she doesn't have the childish wonder she's supposed to have. The world of Oz just looks like someone's neighborhood, not a fantastical magical land, and the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion aren't modeled after people she knows in her world, and there's 1970s slang throughout the dialogue. The Scarecrow quotes a lot of famous people, which again takes you out of the fantasy world, and the way they killed the witch in this version is stupid. There's a fire alarm right in the middle of her throne room, and none of her minions think to pull it. It has great music, but the plot and the direction do not work. Number four, Return to Oz. This one was actually a first time watch for me. I'd only heard that it was supposed to be very dark. And yeah, that was correct. I mean, one of the opening scenes is subjecting Dorothy, who is a child, to shock therapy. You can tell that Tim Burton probably took influence from this movie when he did Alice in Wonderland, because there's a lot of elements from this film that they used in that film, such as everybody thinking that the main character is crazy from her stories about this fantasy world she claims to have visited, the villain being obsessed with people's heads. You can tell this came out around the same time as the Disney movies Watcher in the Woods, the Witch Mountain movies, and Something Wicked This Way Comes, because for some reason in the 70s and 80s, Disney decided to make disturbing live action kids films. I just don't think this is a pretty good attempt at a sequel, even though it's not as good as the original, but I still found some things to appreciate. Number three, Oz the Great and Powerful. It's a pretty worthy prequel to the original, taking inspiration from it by having the first 20 minutes be black and white, and having certain people in Oz be parallels to people that Oz knows back home. It's got a good cast, but what holds it back is it is attempting to be Wicked, except unlike Wicked, which was a cautionary tale about the downfall of somebody because of her choices based on how society treated her, instead the witch in this version is a sympathetic villain who becomes evil because she was tricked into becoming that way. Not all the pieces in this version quite fit together, but still an entertaining watch. Number two, Wicked. Unlike certain movie musical adaptations where it just looks like a bigger budget version of the musical, this actually looks really cinematic. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo have great dynamic with each other, and the actor who plays Fiero really hams it up in the best way. Now, while Ariana Grande does give a good performance, it just feels like she was copying Kristen Chenoweth from the Broadway version. The way she talks, her tone of voice, all feel very reminiscent of Chenoweth, instead of making the character a song of her own. And while Jeff Goldblum gives a good acting performance as the wizard, he was clearly only cast based on his namesake rather than his singing ability. His performance as the wizard just feels like every other character he plays. The movie conveys its anti-prejudice message in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed or preachy, and it doesn't try to make the witch a sympathetic villain. Now, this is part one of two, and if I didn't know that, I'd still be satisfied with where this film ends. It doesn't feel abrupt, it feels earned. This movie is likely going to be popular. Say, for whatever reason, it doesn't make enough money for the studio to justify making part two. Still be fine with that, because it doesn't feel like there's anything that needs to be continued. Whether you're a fan of the musical or not, Wicked soars high. It's a must see. And in first place is Wizard of Oz. Like I said, this is an 85-year-old movie that still feels timeless. Margaret Hamilton's portrayal of the Wicked Witch is so iconic, and she's one of the great movie villains, kids' film or otherwise. In fact, her performance was so scary that Mr. Rogers had to have the actress on his show to assure kids that she was actually a really nice lady in real life. There was even an episode of Sesame Street with her as the witch that was actually never aired due to it being too scary. It was actually considered lost media up until a couple years ago. When this came out, filmmaking was still a relatively new idea. So the fact that this movie is still just as great today as when it came out, has been beloved for generations, and will continue to be beloved for generations, is a testament to its impact. It's one of the most iconic and greatest films of all time. And it comes in at number one. Share a ranking of the Oz versions that you've seen. You can include ones that I didn't include. If there's some obscure version of it out there that you think I should check out, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.